season 3 of The Handmaid's Tale was like one of the most intense, darkest drama series on TV. Lots of really fantastic highlights. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor here at Gold Derby, and I'm here with multiple Emmy winner Bradley Whitford, who stars as Commander Lawrence, a Gilead leader who turns his back on the regime to do his part for the growing resistance. Really interesting character. Bradley, the guy is really complicated. He's in a position of power and privilege, but there's this fascinating undercurrent of sorrow and empathy with him. And how did that side of him develop when you and the show's writers were bringing him to life?
You know, I'm a very lucky guy in terms of the parts that I have been able to play. This role is absolutely the most fascinating to perform. Anytime I always say that anytime you talk about acting, talking about acting is like dancing about architecture. Like you can do it all day, but it's really pretentious. But at the risk of sounding pretentious, and I really mean this. This guy is in play. I think of this guy as a sort of. We had a defense secretary named Robert McNamara who prosecuted the war in Vietnam, and he was a brilliant economist who made all sorts of innovations in the automobile production in Detroit, and then took his brilliance and systematically killed millions of innocent people in Southeast Asia. And I always, the moment I opened the script and read this guy's first lines, that was sort of my key into this, because later in his life, McNamara, there's a brilliant documentary called The Fog of War. He dealt, it was a situation where a guy with a huge brain, his huge brain at some point in his life, combined with his ego, obliterates his humanity. And I think what is happening with Lawrence is that his humanity is fighting back. I don't find him simply sympathetic. I wouldn't call him sympathetic at all, but he is in play. There is a battle going on within him, which it is just an absolute joy to play, because I think as an actor, you sometimes try to sort of narrow down what a character is, and the experience of playing this guy is very, very free. He can go anywhere at any moment. Makes it very, very unpredictable and interesting to play.
Yeah, there's so many scenes where we're looking into Lawrence's eyes and we're trying to work out, like, is he numb? Is he regretful? He's not weak, but is he hopeless? But you're saying, like, for example, when June really berates him towards the end of the season and you think he's going to usurp her because that's his position, but he doesn't. He lets her get away with that because he can see the greater good. There's so much going on with this guy, and it's so fascinating to watch him and try to work out what his motivations are. Like, can you speak to what's ultimately motivating him, though?
Let me first. What you're saying is really a key part of the way this character is written is phenomenal to me. There's a scene where all the commanders are there and they're fighting.
Yeah.
And June is there, and I stop. I interrupt the fight and I make June parade in front of the men, and I force her to choose to get a book for me. And of course, handmaids are not allowed to read. So and what's amazing about this writing is there's hang on. One is I'm bonding. I'm transcending this argument amongst the commanders by bonding with a little, just average day Gilead misogyny. Like let's mock a woman and bond together. I'm also testing her because if I'm going to go out on the limb with this woman, I need to know that she's not, from my point of view, not me, Brad, but from the character's point of view, is this just a sentimental woman who wants her baby back, or is this someone who could be a part of, potentially a coup? So on the one hand, there's a part of him that is a misogynist, that is enjoying mocking her. There's a part of him that is using misogyny to get out of an argument between the commanders. And I'm testing her. And that is just, absolute phenomenal piece of writing. The other thing is that the ceremony scene, which was truly difficult to shoot. Even though we don't see anything, it's absolutely. And I read that, and here you have a scene where, June is basically, for everyone's safety, talking the rapist through the rape.
Yeah.
Which is just, an extraordinary piece of writing. As far as his motivations, I do think his love for Eleanor was real, and I think she made clear to him the horror that he not only enabled but really actively was able to create. And I think somewhere, although he is a very bitter, dark, misogynistic man, I think there is some search for redemption. But what I love about the writing is in a less nuanced show, I would have an epiphany and be a good person. Yeah. And that would diminish the truth of what a character like June is up against, because people don't just have epiphanies and become enthusiastic allies. They are in danger. It's a much more difficult thing for June to deal with than some commander who's just suddenly decided that everything he did was wrong. So it really is a function of what is some of the most phenomenal writing I've ever got.
It's pretty amazing. And speaking of Eleanor, for example, that was beautifully played by Julie Tretz, and she tragically dies in the penultimate episode. I think it's one of the catalysts for Lawrence realizing he has to take some action. But my question is actually more about the overall misogyny that the show so beautifully portrays and shows. It's very confronting for the audience. I wonder how it can resonate with you personally, given that you're in it and you go home of an evening, and how do you wash off the confronting stuff that you guys are doing every day?
Well, I mean, I think you're right that, I've talked about this a lot. One reason the show resonates, unfortunately, is because misogyny is at the reptilian brainstem of right-wing ideology. It's not a bug. It is absolutely the feature. And if you don't believe me, here in America, we elected, the least qualified human being maybe ever to run for president over the most qualified person who happened to be a woman. That's what the show gets right, and misogyny is underneath almost all of the sort of culture wars, at least the ones that take place here. It always surprises people. I guess because the material is so dark, I find it to be one of the most gentle, loving sets that I've ever been on. I always tell people that, and most of that comes from Lizzie, who is really, Lizzie means a lot to me. I've known her since she was 17, young actress, who then I get to meet up with, at the height of her incredible career, and acting with her is absolutely one of the joys of my life. We don't know where it's going to go. We both have a sense of a simultaneous sense of when we found a scene, and we know when we haven't, and we don't have to talk about it a lot. I think that performance is the performance of a generation. The degree of difficulty of what she's doing is impossible to describe. She's doing Sophie's Choice, the series, and she does it. Listen, when you have to be in that kind of emotional pain, you tend to get a little grumpy. I've never seen her get grumpy, and she is at the center of that show creatively. She knows that, the drafts of the script. She is. I'm just incredibly impressed by her. But the funny story on that set is we shoot in Canada, and Canadians, it's well known, they are genetically and stereotypically the sweetest human beings on the planet. But the material is just so brutal. So there are these moments, where the AD will say something like, "Okay, I don't want to rush you, but I think we should get the nooses on the girls." So there are bizarre, kind of horrible moments like that.
I love it. I just love that. It's so cool that Zoe Bartlett from years ago has come full circle as June, and you're working together again. I think about that quite often. I'm going to set the scene for something else now. You have won lots of Emmys and been nominated across the board, and I think that's a really cool honor. I don't know what your thoughts are about awards. We'll go there in a sec. But when you won your first one, you were against two awesome actors from The Sopranos and two of your West Wing co-stars. And you thanked Aaron and Thomas for pushing the most radical envelope there is by making something with intelligence and hope. I'll never forget it. And obviously I was very excited because Josh Lyon was my favorite character. So fast forward 20 years, you're still working on projects that push the envelope, not just Handmaids. There's a bunch of them, and we'll hopefully have time to talk about some of them today. Why is that so important to you? It's probably an obvious question, but can you speak to how important it is to push the envelope?
Well, I used to. I remember the strangest thing when we were doing West Wing. I remember talking with Anthony Edwards a long time ago. Like, you begin doing it like you're pretending to be something that you're not, in an arena that you're not familiar with, and you can't believe that you're getting away with it, and then additionally on West Wing, there was this bizarre realization that the show was being taken seriously. I remember talking with Tim Busfield, and we were talking about the best creative place to be I'm sort of obsessed with the Beatles, and I was saying that, the Beatles changed the world with a message of hope and love. And if you talk to them about it, they weren't taking it seriously at all. They would diminish, what their impact was. And I think that's the best place to be creatively. And Aaron was very aware of the fact that if we go into a place where we feel like we're serving civic vegetables, we will lose. It has to be about storytelling and about characters and all the things you work on in shows that have no sort of social significance. Now, what's happened to me is I have happened to be on shows that have this sort of cultural component, and honestly, it's very. I can't tell you how lucky it is. I mean, both on West Wing and on Handmaid's Tale, as an actor, to be in a creative, simply a creative situation like that with those actors and that writing and those directors is more than you could ever hope for. For it additionally to be part of a cultural discussion is it's bizarrely lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, all I can say is that when I was a young man starting out, I wanted to be Josh Lyman. I just worshipped that character. And I just thought, I always wanted to tell you that. But anyway, that's another story. Okay. You've won a bunch of awards, as I said. What's really cool is you had like 2 nominations for Transparent, 1 in 2015. You had a bunch for West Wing. You won on your first go. You won last year for Handmaid. So now you won in the guest category on both drama and comedy. That never happens. What does that mean? Anything to you? Do you just like the pat on the back, or does it mean more than that?
No, it definitely. Look, it means a lot. At the same time, I always say there's. What I hate about award shows is everybody who is nominated and many people who are not are having the creative experience of their lives. And then you make a reality show where you have to choose a winner, and then you make these people feel like this extraordinary creative experience of their lives is that somehow they're losers because they weren't nominated or something. My metaphor for it is always that it's it's like a dog show. You bring all these like incredible, wonderful, very different dogs together, and then some lady in a muumuu comes out and says, well, the Schnauzer's better than the poodle. When the fact is they're all good dogs, and most of the best dogs never got to be in the show. That said, we all have egos, and I'm honored by it, and it's less of an honor and more of a reminder of how incredibly lucky I've been to have these experiences. I was actually talking with Lizzie about this recently, that I don't think she is certainly not, and I don't think I'm somebody who, has ever taken for granted how lucky I've been able to be as an actor. But I can tell you, having been shut down and not being able to do it for a while, oh my God, I will never take for granted getting to figure out the best way to tell a story, and the set getting quiet and looking into Lizzie's eyes, and then realizing you're lost in a scene. Oh my God, none of us should take that for granted.
And that's across the board. Like when I'm in traffic and commuting to work, I'm not going to bitch about that again. Like there's a lot of things that we just took for granted. Everything was going so fast. Like this reset may have a silver lining, but that's a whole other thing. Before we run out of time,
it will.
Yeah, probably. Obviously, you're also on Perfect Harmony, and that's a complete shift. So I want to quickly talk about that. And also, before we go, you've got a documentary coming out with the Duplass brothers, Not Going Quietly. So we'd really love to hear about that as well, if you could.
Oh, yeah. Perfect Harmony has been just Jason Weiner, who was a producer, directed a bunch of the pilot and a bunch of Modern Families, which is one of my favorite shows ever, reached out to me. And Leslie Wake Webster's a writer she was working with, and she had this sort of personal experience coming from Kentucky. Now, after all that, this was one thing where the reason I responded to this story was I wanted to put in a comedic setting, so that we're not serving any civic vegetables, a bunch of radically different human beings, and allow them to sort of taunt each other. But for you can't, if you're singing together, you really can't hate each other. And I really wanted to get a mainstream show out there. And I'm very hopeful. We just did the season 2 pitch. Of course, the networks have no idea. Yeah, it went really well, and I love playing that bitter old man. I can't imagine why. Not Going Quietly means the world to me. Adi Barkan, a lot of people in the U.S. Became aware of him when he was 31 years old. He was diagnosed with ALS. On his first anniversary, right after his first anniversary, right after he had a baby. And he was an activist who ended up confronting Senator Jeff Flake and on a plane that went viral. And I had been working with him on political stuff, an action for the Dreamers, which are part of our unresolved immigration situation here. And I fell in love with this guy. And through the course of his physical deterioration, and ultimately his total inability to speak, his voice has actually risen as he has fought. One thing that this virus has exposed, because it feasts on the most vulnerable among us, is the complete inexcusable insanity of the richest nation in the world's refusal to take any responsibility for the healthcare of all of its citizens. And he is at the forefront of that battle. I found out that there was a crew that had been documenting him through all the actions he was doing and through his physical deterioration. And he performed, I was married recently, and he performed the ceremony. He's one of those guys, one of those rare human beings who take their own unspeakable tragedy and attempt to transcend it by reducing the suffering of others. And I can't, and by the way, he's really funny. So I can't wait for this, and we got into Tribeca, and all I wanted was to get Adi up there on the stage in his, where he used to live and work in New York. But, obviously we can't do that, but there's a lot of people interested in it. So we'll get it out soon.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. It sounds fascinating. Bradley, we could talk all day, but I won't keep you. Thank you for your time. It's been such a pleasure watching your characters on TV this season.
Well, thank you so much. It's a joy. I'm a lucky guy.
Now, everybody, while you're at home, go to golddebbie.com, make your predictions for The Handmaid's Tale, Perfect Harmony, all your favorite shows. And don't forget to click subscribe to watch all of our great contender chats.